Welcome to Spectrum Perspectives, real talk with parents, professionals, and autism advocates, with your host, Cindy Gellermini.
Hi, everybody. This is Cindy, and welcome to another episode of Spectrum Perspectives. And today I have Renee Chaffee with me. Hi, Renee. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you for having me.
So I've been working on a series and we're talking about spelling to communicate. And I invited Renee to come on because she's an SLP and also does S2C. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So let's go back to the beginning. You are a speech language pathologist. And so how did you get started in that?
So I have been a licensed practicing speech language pathologist since 2005, so 19 years. I
can't believe that's 19 years already. 2005 sounds like it was like a year ago.
So I am Canadian, born and raised. I went in my undergraduate in Canada. We don't actually have an undergraduate degree in communication sciences and disorders because you have to have a master's in order to work. And so I had an undergraduate degree, an advanced psychology major, and a minor in linguistics. When I applied for graduate school, I ended up going to Grand Forks, North Dakota. So I ended up going to grad school in the States, which was only about a 2.5 hour drive from the border of Canada, where I'm from, Winnipeg. And so I ended up going there. I had to do a post-bac year to catch up on all of the courses I didn't get. And then I graduated in 2005. But prior to that, because I was a psychology undergrad, I was actually doing very, very well in a class called behavior modification. I had an A+ in the class. This university is very, very large, so you're kind of just a number. You are literally a number when you look at your grades. And my professor actually at the end of the class was like, Renee Morin, which is my maiden name, is Renee Morin in class today? Can you see me after class? And I was like, oh, I'm never. What did I do? He must think I'm cheating because I have such a high grade. And so I went and I talked to him, and he actually was like, I noticed you're doing really well in this class. You come as a natural. Have you ever thought about doing ABA? So that is what expanded my world in the ABA community. I got trained. I was part of a pilot project in Winnipeg that trained people to go into homes, and we were trying to get government assistance to prove a difference between early intervention. So I had like 7 clients. I'd go into their homes, and I would do ABA until I went off to grad school. And then I became a speech language pathologist with a large background in ABA.
Right. Okay. So was that your first exposure to working with kids on the spectrum?
Yes. I actually didn't even know what ABA was until it was explained to me. And so that was my first actual knowledge, information about autism. And that was in 1998.
And how long did you do that for? Like a year or?
About 4 years.
Okay.
I left for grad school in 2002.
Okay. And you did ABA in Canada or here?
Canada. Well,
okay.
I did ABA here just because in the public school that I worked at for 18 years, it was heavily driven by behavioral analysis. So much so Dr. Ron Leaf, who worked under Lovaas, actually comes and does the trainings. Yeah, so I've met him, I've sat in his seminars, and so.
Okay. And then what made you decide to go into speech instead?
Well, I've always wanted to go in speech. That I was doing my undergraduate degree to go that way. I love working with children. I would say that was a passion of mine, and I didn't think teachers made enough money, nor did I want to stand in front of a class in front of a whole bunch of people. So I thought, no, this is individualized. And
yeah, you like the one-on-one better.
I actually looked at occupational therapy and physical therapy. I don't know. I think it is the same. And in Canada, as well as the United States, a physical therapist and occupational therapist is usually under the direction of a physician. You have to get a referral. And a speech language pathologist could branch out onto her own, which I did. So after being in the public school for 19 years and going on, and I opened up my own private practice. And when did I open? 2021, September of 2021.
Okay, so you've been teaching in the same school for 18 years, but now you branched out and opened your own practice.
In Nevada, in Las Vegas, we are the 5th largest school district in all of the United States. So we actually have a speech department. So I was in the public area. I actually worked also at Nevada Early Intervention part-time, which is 0 to 3. And I was on the autism diagnostic team where I would administer the ADOS and then write up a nice little report, and I'd give it to the neurologist to come up with an autism diagnosis. So I was at multiple schools, still same public school, but multiple schools. I actually have leadership administration credentials. So I worked at a middle school, a high school, and many elementary schools. Elementary school was my preference.
Mm. So in Nevada, do they have like inclusion classes for the kids there, or how does it work?
Well,
Depends on the student, or
yes, it depends on their level of what they call independence and the distraction of others. But we have a self-contained classrooms. Honestly, the ones that are more what we would say that don't require a lot of support, old school way is high, not functional or whatever they say now. They didn't require much support. They were actually mainstream, more like Asperger's-ish. But anyone who were non-speaking, had behaviors or stimming tendencies that would become distracted were put in self-contained.
Self-contained. Okay, but it's in the public school though. It's a self-contained.
Yeah, in the building.
Okay. Yeah, just because where I am in New Jersey, my son went to a school that was only kids on the spectrum. That was it. It wasn't a public, well, it's public, but it's a separate building, a separate school.
Oh, wow. No, we don't have that.
Yeah.
So we have multiple schools, and depending on the school, they have programs. So I, in my last year, part-time of my job was I worked all the programs. So kids is our autism program for 3 and 4-year-olds. Then we have primary autism, which is kinder to 2nd. And then we have intermediate autism 3rd to 5th, and then self-contained in middle school and self-contained in high school. So, but they're within the schools, and different schools have different programs.
Okay. I just like to know, because I have listeners that are all over the country, and sometimes people are wanting to know, where can we move to get different services, like who's got what, so I just am curious to know what it's like in Las Vegas. So are you in the school anymore, or no? You're just only doing your own private?
No, yeah, so I did, when was my last year? I did do part-time. So honestly, my husband is self-employed. And so for the longest time, I worked there to have insurance.
Sure.
So when I went part-time to start my private practice. And so I was focusing kind of on both, but keeping our insurance. And then after that, my husband actually got a job teaching at UNLV, which is the university here. And so he, part-time, he teaches 1 day a week. But so he actually started getting insurance, and I was like, I'm out. So I'm like, yes, it's my turn. Yeah, so that's what launched me into my private practice.
Okay, and you've been doing that how long?
Since 2021.
And I've explained to some people in my videos and in my children's books, actually, when Robbie was first diagnosed with autism and we first started getting speech and OT and everything, the only thing I knew of speech were kids that maybe had a lisp, or, and they would work on correcting their speech. I didn't understand it. And the speech therapist had him use the PEC system and use some sign language, so, and they told me, I said, that's all considered speech. Speech is all about communication, and however we can however we can get them to communicate is,
So was your son a non-speaker?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. He had a couple of words when he was little. But I realized it was only when he was under stress. Like if I went to go work out and I drop him off at the nursery, right? Every kid cries for their mommy, right? So he would say mama, bye-bye, or he wanted his baba, his bottle. Maybe 6 words. And then 3 months went by and I realized I haven't heard him say anything. And I mentioned it actually to, I think, another speech therapist. It was another mom that I knew. And as soon as I said that, like, she was like, what? You got to get his hearing and speech evaluated right away, and that was the beginning, that we found out. Yeah. So one thing led to another, and then you get the autism diagnosis eventually. But, and he went to, his early intervention was at the Summit Speech School, which is for kids that are hearing impaired. But they did not use sign there. They were really big on, they said, you don't use sign language in the real world. They need to learn how to speak and how to read lips. And that was their thing. But anyway, it turned out it wasn't hearing after all. It was.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And that's why, I love what I do, because as a speech language pathologist, you hear everything. And parents, naturally, out of love, that unconditional love, we really do predict the needs of our children, right? Like, we honestly, you guys develop your own communication. When they're rubbing their eyes, they're tired. It's probably a time away from their nap. You're putting them to bed. When they are running to the kitchen, they're hungry. Like, we communicate, and as parents, it's hard to start saying, like, okay, like, let's pause, let's wait, let's give that intent. So then they have a means, because, I see it all the time, especially when I specialize, is they were like, and I was like, they are communicating. That's effectively communicating.
Right.
What they want.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, but parents are always going to say, use your words.
Yes, use your words, which is like the hardest thing. Like, let's let them show us. Let's let them use our hands as a tool. Like, they are doing everything they can to communicate. Communication is natural. Without it, you can't. It's a human right. Frustration occurs at all ages, right? From 2 all the way up. And surprisingly now, when they can communicate, all of that behavior goes away.
Mm-hmm. There you go. You just hit the nail on the head. This is a conversation that I keep having with so many people, is the behaviors are for a reason, right? They're trying to communicate something to you, right? When you see the behaviors. But once these kids that start spelling and opens up a world of communication, and now finally they can communicate to you what they've been trying to say to you all these years, the behaviors go away, or
Right.
They're lessened, because now they can finally tell you what they're trying to say. So let's talk about the spelling. So so you use spelling to communicate with your what do you call them? Patients? What do you call them? Your clients?
I call them clients. We call them spellers.
Okay.
Spellers is just global for.
So how did you find out about S2C?
So I was watching a program that I always watch. And there was an advocate, J.B. Henley, who I followed for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
I actually read his first book. And he was on, and this was, I believe it was actually, it was 2021. I think in May of 2021 it aired. So it was right during the pandemic. And so I saw this video of this child that I literally watched grow up through these programs, and he was able to communicate fully, robustly, access agency, everything that, as a speech language pathologist, are gatekeepers, that I've specialized in my whole entire life. I considered myself an AAC specialist. I've been trained on every AAC method. Possible on the Dynavox, all of them.
Right. And just explain that for people that don't know, but just tell them what the AAC and the Dynavox is.
Oh, I'm sorry. So AAC stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication. And so there's aided and unaided. So all forms of communication, if it's not speech related, we use, so PECS, even the picture exchange system, is communicating. You're supposed to pick up a picture, walk it to someone, communicating A to B. So what AAC is for people who doesn't have reliable speech. So we work with non-speaking, minimal speaking, or unreliable speaking. So they can't use speech as their primary means of communication. Then we give them an alternative of many alternatives to see how we could get them communicating, because that is our ultimate goal. I don't care which way they choose. I don't pick it for them. I just know what works. And I know now what not works, because I was doing it for 18 years and I wasn't seeing any response. And you know, the definition of insanity is doing something over and over and over again and expect a different response. So when I saw this person that I was following, when I considered myself an AAC specialist and gave presentations on AAC to a lot of SLPs,
that's basically like an iPad, and they've got got a program on there that they press. So, they press the button and it speaks for them. Basically, it's I want juice.
Yeah,
right?
well, that's the software, the program that you're talking
See,
about.
Robbie was never able to use any of that stuff, so that's why, you know, and there's people that watch that don't even have a personal experience with autism, but they're just curious. So that's why I like to explain people that don't live in autism world.
Don't live in autism world. So there's a Dynavox that used to be like this big brick. They have now made it they all almost look like iPads. They're called different things like Access 1900 or whatever, 1800. There's a whole bunch of different ones, but the program software changes. So there's LAMP, which is a language program, but they're all picture symbols. So yeah, exactly what you're saying. I want candy. And so the assumption there, these are all cognitive devices, right? They are assuming that they don't have the language. And so they're determining them by pictures, which is almost like a 2 to 3 year old level. We all learn through pictures. I mean, if you don't know how to read and you see a little lady, you know, it's the lady's bathroom. Right. So, but it's limiting, right? We have to pre-program it. Granted, when they're super little, yeah, we could pre-program most of their wants and needs. But there's no way I could predict what my 9-year-old wants and needs every moment of their life. It is impossible. It turns into a big guessing game. So you see that frustration it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because as they're wanting to communicate and not understanding why they can't communicate and why everyone else lips moves, but their lips can't move and can't produce this amazing speech that everyone else does so easily. That frustration builds and builds and builds and builds. And then they wonder, you know, why.
And the reason they can't is because apraxia, usually.
Exactly.
Can you explain apraxia?
Yes, I can. So to understand apraxia, you have to understand praxis. And so praxis is the ability to execute change of smooth motor movements. So it's the plan, coordinate, initiate, stop, and adjust that plan smoothly. We do this every day, all the time.
And don't even think about it.
New purposeful movement. And you don't even think about it. It comes natural. So when any motor skill is practice and practice and practice and practice, it becomes automatic. So that's where that autopilot kicks in, right? Where you don't even have to think about what to do. So apraxia, which comes in wherever it was, it's pretty much the layman's term. It's called the brain-body disconnect. And it's the inability to perform these purposeful motor activities despite normal muscle strength, and even though it's fully understood. So they put those two caveats because in the speech world, if there's normal muscle strength, if there's abnormal muscle strength, we actually call that dysarthria. And
say that again. It's called what?
Dysarthria. So
if someone have to look that up.
Yeah, if someone has a stroke, and so it's a neurological damage, and they are able to articulate, but their words aren't coming out right, but they know what they want to say. I have a really funny grad school experience with this. And you could see the frustration that it's not coming out right. We consider that apraxia speech. But if you see weakness in tone and they're not getting the proper lip strength, so they can't talk or to create a P, and they can't get the intraoral pressure that's needed, then we actually consider that dysarthria, where there's muscle issues.
Got it.
And the fully understood part is huge too, because if they, depending on what kind of stroke they have, if they have a right hemisphere stroke or a left hemisphere stroke, if they are not fully understood or they are running around, we consider that aphasia. That means that they are having trouble retrieving those words. So it's very different from apraxia. They are all medically different.
Right. Yeah. Many times when I try to explain this to people, I say it's kind of like somebody that had a stroke. It's like it's here, but they can't get it out.
Yes. And this is like what I like to say to people about the whole motor issue. We know many people. I mean, Paul Alexander, I don't know if you know who that is. I just did a lesson on him recently, but he actually developed meningitis as a young child, or no, it was polio as a young child. I think he was like 8, and he was literally paralyzed from the neck down, and he had to be in an iron lung because he didn't have that voluntary control over breathing. And he lived in it for many years. He literally spelled to communicate using a pointer his dad made him with his mouth to touch letters on a board. Because he was only developed this later on, everyone presumed him to be competent, right? Oh, he was,
Because he had it before. Yeah.
because he had it before. Same with Stephen Hawking's.
Yes.
Now look at
Exactly.
Stephen Hawking's. He had ALS, right?
Right.
A motor degenerative disorder.
Mhm.
He went through the gamut of AAC. He literally ended his life with one voluntary control of an infrared going through his cheek and how he would write books. So if someone just encountered him in life and saw that he was non-speaking, confined to a wheelchair, our social norms for some reason is to think that it affects their intelligence. But he, once again, was brilliant.
Right.
And it had nothing to do with his motor process, but everyone presumed competence in him as well.
Right.
And unfortunately, childhood apraxia of speech is young, right? The absence of it completely is definitely apraxia.
Right.
They can't coordinate any of the motor patterns. So, and it's such a fine, robust skill. And part of that skill is innate. And what I mean by that in a speech 101 lesson is when you say certain words, we have counterparts, which we call minimal pairs. So let's say pig, for example, a farm animal. If I didn't seal my lips, create intraoral pressure, and release it at the exact same times with my vocal folds not vibrating, it makes a P sound. But if that's turned on, it makes a B sound, okay? So pig could easily become big, right? And the back sounds of that, so pig could easily become pick. All of those phoneme changes actually the word and the meaning in our language. But no one ever had to say to you, oh, you have to turn on your vocal folds. No, because we innately learned it.
Right.
So coordinating all of these complex motor systems is extremely hard and robust. And speaking people take advantage of that because it is the most common form of communication, but it's definitely not the only form of communication. And we know this through the deaf population, their ASL, the blind population, Braille. And so it's just meeting them where they're at,
Right.
their ability to communicate.
Did you understand apraxia when you were in the early years of you doing speech? Because just as an SLP, how would you work with kids like that? I did an interview with Soma, and she had said, you can send your kid to all of these beautiful therapies and they could keep say Baba Bear. She says it's not happening because the Wernicke and the broke up area of the brain, and she goes into this whole explanation. But I knew she was talking about speech when she said the Baba Bear, but she didn't say that.
Absolutely.
But I knew that's what she was talking about. So that's why I'm just curious, like on your end, like basically what I'm getting at is, once you learned S2C, how do you compare to how you used to teach the kids then to how you would teach the kids now? Like, what have you learned now that's different in how you see, the apraxia and all that?
Well, it's made me a much more efficient SLP. I mean, I was doing all of that, but now I know why some things worked and some things didn't.
Right.
So if we go through the paradigm, I think I got to go through all of the paradigm shift. And this is like the big conversation, right?
Yeah.
This is where, as a speech language pathologist in schools, besides the areas of articulation, phonology, which is just younger speech, voice, fluency, those are all motor disorders, right? There's no question that's not unique to me. That's what we're taught in school. Then you hit receptive and expressive language and functional communication. Now, that in a speech world is a cognitive approach. We administer tests to determine where they're functioning, and then we treat them accordingly. And this is practiced in schools every single year. Psychologists determine it. We determine it. That's how they are found eligible. I'm sure having an autistic son, you're not unheard of receptive expressive language delay, severe language delay. And functional communication, they don't have any. All of this stuff, awful, embarrassing to say now. But specializing, I was very, very successful in getting children to communicate when I went younger. At NEIS, I did do a picture exchange system, but it's gross motor. If you think about it, besides pinching, and but everything else is walking. So it really would take off, especially with American Sign Language. All of it's fine motor, except for a few big words like more. So more.
Those are the only ones Robbie could do. Yeah. Eat, more, help.
Yeah. And so now I'm like, oh, now it all just makes sense. Like it all just clicked. So when we are taught about apraxia, it is a motor planning issue. So we know with apraxia, practice. You're better off practicing 10 minutes every day to learn that motor plan to become automatic. So what I consider it is speech. I mean, if you think of articulation, a child can't say their R's, okay? Now it's a motor planning issue. They practiced it the wrong way for so long that it's automaticity. So what I'm trying to do is reverse that. So what I do is I take sounds that are super close to that R, and where that R is produced, which is in the back of the mouth, the G sound. So I would be agree, and I would just get them to get that tongue going back, and we drill it. And then eventually you hear that R starting to come in, and then I say in-bree, and I just move that little pendulum, and it all starts to click. So same with apraxia, because it's a motor planning issue, the more you practice it, those words start to come in. Apraxia, they weren't allowed to work on it in our school district. So our school district knows nothing about apraxia because 60% of them are undergraduate. And because you're an undergraduate, they couldn't allow you to actually work on apraxia. You had to have your master's. So I knew apraxia just from grad school. And it is really in an NEIS, but which is Nevada Early Intervention. It's birth to 3. It's really, they have to have some speech sounds, and then you're molding it into saying it, all of them. And so you're just fine tuning with practice to get there. So you're saying, but, and then you're whispering. So it's using a lot of visual mirrors to see them. They could copy my lips, and then some soar, but that's the same with extreme phonology. So phonology is patterns of speech. All children make their patterns easier. So like if a 2-year-old says, look, dat, and you're like, no, it's a cat. And they're like, dat. It's because they're just developmentally appropriate. They can't discriminate it yet. And then they start to fine tune it later on. So that's what we call phonology, is they have those patterns. When those patterns don't diminish by a certain age, intervention is usually needed. Apraxia is their patterns aren't following a phonology pattern. They're kind of all over the place. Sometimes their vowels are correct, sometimes they're not. Sometimes all sounds, and so you can't follow them. And then that's when we really say it's probably apraxia of speech. Mm-hmm. We did do apraxia goals, like CVC words, CV words, VC, like the cow says moo moo, like those kind of things. So they did work on them, but once again, you'll never see anything that mentions apraxia in the school district I work because of that reason.
Interesting. All right, so let's talk about S2C a little bit. So you found out about it. You saw JB Handley on TV. You found out about it. So then what? You decided you wanted to learn more about how is his son communicating here with this letterboard and all that?
Yeah, so originally the whole plan was I saw this, I sent it to so many SLPs, OTs, my psych. I sent it to so many people to watch.
Mhm.
Some watched it, some as soon as they saw the program, it was just like, no. So I saw it, I think it came out in May 2021. So I looked into it immediately. And all I saw when I typed it in, International Association for Spelling as Communication, they're in Virginia. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have two young kids. My husband's gonna kill me. Because he is always like, you're forever in school. Because I kind of am. I'm always learning something new or doing something new. And so I was like, okay, this isn't feasible. I can't do this. And then out of the blue, positives about the pandemics is I had 27 autistic kids who couldn't keep on their socks and shoes that I had to. We were one of the last school districts to go back in person. So I had to figure out how to work with these kids and keep them on screen, which was so hard. And so that launched me. I could see everyone and I could kind of tell instantly. I'm a very holistic person. I could tell the families that were following a very holistic approach. They were gluten, casein free. They were doing supplements. And so I was like, who's your doctor? Just curious. And they were like, I heard the same name over and over again, Dr. Nagosian, Dr. Nagosian. And so I stalked Dr. Nagosian. And then I finally was like, man, I'm referring people to him and he doesn't even know who I am. So I wrote him a fan email. It was pretty embarrassing. It was like, you don't know me, but I know you. And he responded and was like, oh my goodness, yes, come and meet me. Come into my office. So that was January of 2022. No, March of 2022. So I went into his office and, occupational hazard, I have verbal diarrhea. I'm like, I'm going to just keep it to basics. No, I spilled my whole entire life story. And then he was like, oh, you know what? My son is doing this program. You probably have never heard of it. It's called Spelling to Communicate. And my jaw dropped. I was like, shut the front door. I was so shocked. I'm like, well, where are you going? You're going to your doctor. And he was like, no, I was going to Oceanside to see Don Marie. And I was like, oh. So at that point, I left his office. I literally went home, I researched it, and I applied to be a practitioner that time. I wrote Dr. Nagosian back saying, I'm in. I start on April of 2022. And he's like, me too. We're going to be in the same cohort.
Oh, so he's taking the class too.
Yeah, so he took the cohort too. And he has a non-speaking son. Very fascinating.
So you did it in California instead?
No, I actually, so as I started.
Because you mentioned Don Marie.
Yes. So I showed IS has this little video about explaining what it is. And I showed my husband this video and he was like, oh, you're going to change lives. He's like, just go do it. And so I signed up and then in my first session, so they have a kickoff weekend. And in that kickoff weekend, I found out that Don Marie no longer takes practitioners. So I actually did have to do my internship in Virginia.
In Virginia. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So were you with Elizabeth Fossler?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, she wasn't there. She was in Sydney, Australia or something.
Okay. But it was at her place.
I actually haven't met her in person yet.
Okay. But it was at her place though, that you went to in Virginia.
Therapy Center.
Got it. Okay. So if anybody has seen the movie Spellers that JB Hanley is in, he talks about he flew to Virginia and that's where his son learned it. And it's in the video of him learning with Elizabeth, the S2C. Okay. So you went and you took the class and then, and were you sitting here thinking, oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, is the correct words. One, I have to give it to Elizabeth Fossler because as soon as I found out she was a speech path, I was like, oh, this is perfect, So her seminars and how she structures the most intense course I've ever taken in my life, and I've taken a lot of schooling, is so hands-on. I never actually witnessed anyone using a letterboard in person before. I mean, I started definitely doing my research and found like every video. I even have a video of Elizabeth Bossler doing RPM. I watch so much stuff because I'm not a person that just jumps in and does it. I got to know everything. So every single seminar that came out, I mean, there was one seminar that was so tough. I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks. I literally wanted to go back to, if I could, I didn't have a cell phone until I was 27. So if I could go back in time and find every client that I worked with, those babies, I would in a heartbeat to say, let me try again. Let me do better. Because I felt this tremendous amount of guilt, to be honest. But then, you know, I look at it like know better, do better, right? And this whole evidence-based research and this whole ASHA thing that you brought up earlier.
Yeah, this is what we talked about that off camera. So that's something I do want to bring up because my son teaches special ed and he just got his master's and he had to write a paper. And I said, write it on RPM. And he Googled it and immediately he sees the ASHA, the warning, you know, facilitated communication, S2C RPM is dangerous, you know, and it was, you know, discredited. And he's like, Mom, I can't write about that. So I was a little upset about that.
Background is ABA in ASHA in the 80s, ABA was actually considered dangerous. They had almost the exact same warning on the ASHA website about it.
Right. It took people years to fight to get it, you know, to get it to be approved so that insurance would cover ABA.
Exactly. And that's how it honestly got approved, right? One person ABA changed their lives and she fought and fought. And I saw a documentary on it. She fought and fought and fought the insurance company to have it covered. Well, once one insurance company said, we're going to cover it, it created a wave. And then once insurance started covering it, it became money. So then BCBAs, I didn't even know what a BCBA was. I swear when I was an ABA tutor, that word did not exist, which is a behavior certified. No, what does BCBA stand for?
Yeah, I don't know what the first B is, certified behavior analysis or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so ethically, that was put in there. It was considered dangerous. And then once insurance started picking it up and they changed it. They changed it from behavior modification. It was called behavior modification when I was not called an ABA tutor.
Right.
I was a behavior modification specialist.
Yes.
And so then it changed to ABA, insurance picked it up and they were like, no, this is the king all be all, right? And so, which is really sad. So now we have a speech language pathology approach. This is a cognitive approach. And that is pretty much, they don't understand it, which is really sad. But then behavior came and it's like, no, it's not that they don't understand it. They're purposely being defiant. They don't want to do it. They're escaping this. And so it was like the bang of both worlds, right? Not only don't you understand how to sit, I got to physically show you how to sit or you'll never know how to sit. It was awful. So in time, this motor approach, which shifted to a motor approach, has been happening for years and years and years, and way before us. And we,
wait, what do you mean? What motor approach? Are we talking about S2C?
Facilitation communication is a motor approach.
Facilitated. Yeah. Okay.
RPM is a motor approach. It derived from facilitation communication.
Right.
Spelling to communicate, a motor approach. So by a motor approach is we've determined once we coach their motor and their sensory, which guides that motor, they soar. And they will tell us, my insides don't match my outsides. I'm super excited to be here, but my body is running out of the room. I'm super excited, but my mouth keeps saying, let's go, let's go, let's go, because it's been rotely learned, automatic, and I don't have control over it anymore. So in the speech word, we like to say practice makes permanent, not perfect. Whatever is practiced will become permanent. There's no way to unmyelinate that. You could only create new neuronal pathways. All motor skills can be taught and learned at any age. Okay, so let's do an example. Driving. When you first learned how to drive your car, Hands,
Yes.
knuckles, the gas.
And you have to think about everything you're doing.
Every single thing, signaling, the lights, stopping, releasing that gas, not double pedaling it. Everything is purposeful motor to keep you. Well, once that is practiced enough, we go on autopilot, right? It happens all the time. You know, you're used to driving, you're not looking at the lights, you could listen to a podcast, people who smoke could smoke in one hand and eat a burger in the other, you could feed your children in the back of the car all at the same time and have perfect driving skills. Now you move to England and what happens? They're driving on the opposite side of the street, that your automaticity, your autopilot taking over. So is it impossible to learn that? No, but you would have to keep yourself completely in purposeful motor all the time. I'm driving on the left side. I'm passing on the left side. I'm turning right on the left side. I'm turning left on the left side. You would set up a thing to practice and practice and practice to create new pathways. You're not going to forget how to drive on the right side, but you got to create new pathways to drive on the left side because it wasn't what's created. So that's what also comes into verbal loops, which is really common with our clients, is they practice and practice something over again and it becomes automatic. My favorite example with this, because I can't tell you the amount of times I've done it, it's embarrassing, is saying after you speak to your loved ones, saying, bye, love you. And then you talk to a client and you're like, bye, love you. Oh my goodness.
No,
I don't love you. No, well, I don't love you. I do like you. Like, it's awkward, right? But once again, it was such an autopilot that it took over. And I didn't keep it in purposeful. So this happens all the time. When the whole scandal and that unfortunate situation happened way back in the 80s, or I think it's actually early 90s, maybe, the black and white screen, anyone could look it up. That's when it actually started getting a really bad rap.
But this is facilitated communication we're talking about.
Facilitated communication, because it was actually being practiced in multiple schools. And unfortunate when that situation happened, and that evidence came into what they consider evidence came into light, it was pulled from all schools. But those people,
see, I don't know anything about this. I'll have to look it up.
So those people still presumed competence. So all of those people in the motor world, this is a motor issue. Speech is 100% motor. All forms of communication is 100% motor. Language, cognition is in a completely different part of our brain. So its praxis is the ability to smoothly coordinate. But in the beginning, your thoughts and ideas that occur in Wernicke's and Broca's area in your brain when you're hearing me talk is completely intact. You're having tons of thoughts and ideas, but you're not talking right now. You're probably thinking about what you're going to say next, or, oh my goodness, this person's off her rocker. But what happens next is you have to plan and execute that plan. You have to start motor, stop motor, adapt that motor on demand. And that goes up to your motor strip. That is what's impaired, especially people who have sensory motor differences. So when we're talking about sensory guides our motor, and in the autism world, in the autism land, there's a lot that we don't agree on, but we all agree on that they have sensory motor challenges, right? All of us understand that they are either hyposensitive or hypersensitive. So they don't react to needles, but a plane flying over 1,000,000 years, they're down, curdled eyes, trying to regulate themselves. So that sensory system is hijacking their ability to carry out that process. So as a communication regulation partner, regulation being the most important is to balance that motor and cognitive through very structured, age-appropriate lessons, sharing knowledge, and getting that thinking and doing, because that's what's broken for them, the thinking and doing. And we see this all the time with kids. They smile beautifully, and the second the camera comes out and we say, smile, they're like,
or they're looking away.
They're like, really? Like, just naturally smile. And I'm like, no, don't reach your teeth. Like, every parent goes through it. So that's because they brought it into their purposeful thought, and bang, they couldn't do it. It's not automatic. So
Interesting.
yeah, so it's complicated, right? Because all language and all tests of what we say intelligence use a motor component to assess that intelligence. And really, intelligence isn't assessed through ability to do stuff, because what if it's your motor that's impaired? And the common metaphors of that is like teaching a fish to climb a tree, and then he's dumb. He's cognitively extremely delayed. He can't climb that tree. Or, you know, speaking to a deaf person and expecting him to answer questions, you know, or showing pictures to a blind person and expecting them to know what the picture is, because we're not meeting them at their modality. And so, and that's also where the non-speaking and nonverbal comes in, because nonverbal,
they say they want the science, the evidence.
Approved, to be honest. I think it does need to be recognized, and you know what? I think it's going to take all the spellers, the insurance to pick it up. Because let's be honest, they say they want research. It's not research-based, but what AAC method is? Tell me, because I haven't seen research for Dynavox. None of it is. Research won't come near any AAC because it's not standardized. Elizabeth Vossler, being a speech language pathologist, knew this. And that is why her whole life's mission was to standardize a practice that everyone could replicate. Everyone is doing the exact same way. So researchers will say, yes, I'll look into this. So there was a study done that proved S2C, specifically spelling to communicate. They had 9 people and they did eye gazing. And it's a study from, I think, 2020. When it came out. So ASHA's position statement, I think, came out in 2018. So that was when this research didn't come yet. But research takes time, and research is not the reason to not do things educationally. That's empirical data. There's not a lot of research when it comes to school system. They all say research-based. ABA is loosely research-based, if at best, because there is no standardization. There's people who do, you know, Montessori ABA and Sunrise ABA, and like there's so many different avenues, because some people are like, no, like I don't want you to treat my child like a dog. If you say it to a dog, please don't say it to my child. And that was what my philosophy was. If you say it to a dog, I'm a very good behavior dog trainer. Don't say it to a child. It's disrespectful. And so for me to do that paradigm shift, honestly, because ethically, I have my master's degree is to keep within ethical guidelines, and knowing what I know is being within ethical guidelines. I can't practice something that I practiced for 18 years wrong, and then I find a method, and I have now, well, children, but he's 11, communicating fully his hopes, desires, and dreams, and has full, robust communication. So any speech path that literally says, well, I can't do it because ASHA, but
well, schools too.
That's not true. Yeah.
The schools won't accept it either, you know, and no, you know, there's moms that are fighting their schools to allow them to use it. And they're like, oh, no, we can't.
Yes. And so, and Elizabeth will have a lot more to say on that, because
I'll tell that she's my next interview.
Yes. I'm so happy I preceded her, by the way. She will tell you in depth of that, like getting it into insurance and getting into the public. And that's why the standardization of this is so important, and why I'll always fall under that mother bird. So there's many speech language pathologists that use it. I mean, by far, I'm probably one of the newer ones, except I brought on a speech path. She's going to be starting her course at the end of September. But I would say seeing is believing. And if you just keep an open mind, this is the metaphor I like to use. If someone told you that black swans don't exist, and one flew into the window and landed on your lap, how many black swans would you have to see in order to believe that they exist? The answer is one, right? you can never unsee that black swan, and you won't go on with your life saying, well, black swans don't exist. So in my world, S2C was the black swan. To be honest, being Canadian, going to school in northern US, I never even heard of RPM. I actually briefly learned about facilitation communication and that it's just not warranted. You can still do it. They have strong suggestions. They might scare off some people that don't know better, but they have, you know, their recommendations. That's all they are. And it's so ableistic for a speech language pathologist to think that they know everything. And if you're not open to looking at something else that works, ouch, because we'll never grow. We'll never grow as a society. They will never grow. And why marginalize a population that has been so marginalized their entire life? Like, we talk about discrimination. How is this not a form of discrimination, right? Even if, and this is me talking, always me talking, but even if there is highly influencing when it comes to facilitation communication, knowing that and preventing the influencing, which is what Elizabeth Bosseler did in her standardization, it was the key. So we highly criticize ourselves on a regular basis. If I have a client who said something within a guided lesson, you know, we consider open and fluent within a guided lesson. So if I'm talking about orca whales, I'm like, you know, what sea animal would you want to be and why? So they would say, like, I want to be blah, blah, blah. And so we consider that like open communication. Now we videotape everything. So I could go back and be like, did I have my hand up? Did I move my board? So all of those play into that. And why would I influence that? Like, I mean, there's always a chance of influencing, but ultimately I'm teaching them a way to communicate. I want to know what they know. I don't want them to know what I know. Right? I'm essentially a Sherpa. I'm just their passageway to get their speech out, and especially to train. What I always say is I can't be their person, right? You don't want to communicate only 2 or 3 times a week. Someone else has to be trained. Essentially, I need to train, or I'm not doing my job. I need to train you to communicate, because I'm sure there's some stuff that, 1, I don't want to know about, and 2, that's very personal that they don't want to talk to me about, or if even a therapist about, they want to talk to you about. So it's super important to have
Are you talking about the parents, training the parents to work with them?
Parents or anybody else, siblings.
Yeah, because if they're only coming to you once a week, what are they supposed to do the rest of the week? You know, they can't communicate the whole rest of the week.
Yeah, well, and they practice. So she really has the amount of information all piled into this course. Just everything just makes sense, right? So what she essentially did, because all forms of communication is motor, so she took it out of speech. Speech is the finest of all the motors, and she placed it into gross motor because it's easier for us. So we learn to walk before we learn to talk. Right. So she placed it into the gross motor, making it a point to letters just going in and out, in and out. So we do guided, age-appropriate lessons. We ask no one questions because we know they are capable of learning, they want, and they can learn. So we teach them, we read them a paragraph, and then we ask a no one question, which is one answer. So it's like, what are we talking about today? And they would say, I would hold up the O board, and they would say, oh, then, are then, orca whales. Okay, and then I would ask them the next question. So it's super guided, and what we're looking at is motor accuracy. So we prompt to help their motor because we know they're all there. They don't have a reliable motor system. They are troubling thinking and doing. A good example of executive function is holding on to that thought, right? They have tons of thoughts. They've been thinking and non-speaking for, depending on how old they are, their whole lives. And so they have all of these thoughts and they're rapidly going through their brains. And now they have to isolate that thought, think of that first letter, get their eyes on that letter and start their motor plan and stop their motor plan. So it's a lot going on. And what we're trying to do is bridge that brain body, what's connected, what is disconnected, or try to reconnect it. And so then they start thinking and doing, and it becomes easier and easier. Their motor accuracy increases. They don't need my prompts anymore at all. And my prompts are typically just continuation problems. That first letter is, look it with your eyes, go, go. Get it. That next letter after O is, R after R is. And so you develop a rhythm. They keep going.
Yep.
They're staying regulated. And they also know that you 100% believe in them. There's not a client I don't believe in that will
Right.
soar in this process
Right.
because it's a motor skill.
Right.
You just have
Right.
to put in time to build that motor accuracy
Right.
and automaticity.
And I've heard people mention their regulation partner too. Like you need to be regulated
100%.
to help them regulate. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
You
like
can't be getting
dogs.
too excited or nervous or, you got to be very
Yeah. It's
calm.
like that dog that has that sixth sense. I feel all non-speakers have this sixth sense.
I
They
agree.
can tell people's auras. They could tell if they're believers. They
I
could
agree.
tell everything about them the second they're walking in the room or probably even coming into the house.
Yep.
So, and it's the same with dogs, the person that fears dogs, what dog always goes to them? The
Yes, they
person
do.
that is terrified of animals, dogs navigate to them because they feel a different energy and they don't understand why.
Right.
And so I really do feel that trust and that presumption of competence, I think it would change ABA. It would change the cognitive aspect of it not being cognitive, it being the assumption of competence. So when I still teach PEC, so I currently, so spelling to communicate starts at age 5. That's when it's recommended for us.
Okay.
But since I'm a speech language pathologist, my youngest client's 3.5. My oldest one is 19 right now. So my 3.5-year-old is non-speaking. He has some words he repeats. He has some echolalia. But when I'm coaching PECs, there's no silent partner. There's no cause and effect. He understands everything. I'm like, in order for you to tell me you want bubbles, pick up the picture and put it in my hand. And he's like, it is so quick. It took me probably about 10 seconds instead of me hand over hand, grabbing him the picture, put the silent partner, putting it in my hand, and then me saying, you want bubbles? And running and blowing bubbles in their face. Like it all clicked. And that's why, especially after that seminar, I was like, oh, that's why they were able to very easily go and get a picture off the fridge and give it to their mom. Like, because they knew that that's how they could communicate. Before, they would just go to the kitchen, point to the fridge, and stuff like that. So that's when it all started, that gross and that fine motor switch. And we all can communicate using fine motor. We always have. Texting is fine motor. Like winking is fine motor. All communication is fine motor.
Right.
Speech is completely separate from language.
Right. And the difference between the spelling is the gross motor, because as opposed to typing, right? Because with my son, they would try to have him type and they were like, oh, he's not capable of doing this. So he just doesn't understand. He doesn't understand language. He can't spell. He doesn't get it. It's like, and now I realize he just doesn't have the fine motor skill to do it. But if you would have tried the gross motor, maybe it would have
And I
worked.
would put my money on it that it's the eyes. So eyes are fine motor, and tracking, which is called smooth pursuit, and saccadic eye movements is needed for reading, right? Because you have to be able to track. So my daughter actually was a struggling reader. She's neurotypical, and my brother is dyslexic. So I was like, oh, whoops, there it is, right? Like I was completely fine. And so she was going to a private school in kindergarten. They wanted to hold her back. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet of you. No, it's not going to happen. So I put her into first grade. She started receiving tutoring 2 hours a week. By the end of first grade, that teacher, who was phenomenal, was like, I just don't get it. Like, she's so high in every other aspect, but she just can't read. And I was like, yeah, I know. And so then she started second grade. And halfway through second grade, I was like, okay, I got to get an outside assessment. So I actually brought her to Sylvan Learning Center. And in second grade, they determined that she was reading at a kindergarten 6-month level. Now, we're talking about lots of intervention here. She was seeing a tutor 2 hours every single week because I was going to be her art response intervention, her tutor. And she still wasn't able to read. And so it was actually Dr. Negosian who was like, you need to take your daughter to Dr. Langerville in town. And I was like, oh, okay. And so my mom, okay, so this is the embarrassing part of being a speech path. I told you, verbal diarrhea. My mom is actually the one who was like, I think Emma might need glasses. And being a speech path, everyone who qualifies for speech, you have to rule out vision and hearing. In public schools, by kindergarten, if they aren't picking up the letters, it's the first screening they do. In private schools, they don't do that. I have 20/20 vision. I've never needed glasses my entire life. My husband couldn't see the big E, but had LASIK before we were dating. So I was like, oh my God, she can't see. So I brought her to a doctor, and it was almost the worst case scenario. My daughter has amblyopia. So amblyopia is when you have two different visions in your eyes, and your brain decides, well, screw that eye, we're just not going to use it. If amblyopia goes very long without your brain using that eye, that's when you used to see back in the day that eye curls into the corner.
Yeah.
Because that the muscles atrophy because it's not.
Oh, wow.
So she was actually legally blind in her left eye. She couldn't. So we had to patch her good eye to force her vision to use, and she had to be on an iPad, something she loved, for 2 hours every single day, patching her good eye. And we did that for a year. We corrected it to 90%. And then I went to see Dr. Langerville. And that's when I was like, wow, like this is all just meant to be in my life, because what are the odds of this? So my daughter, when she was asked to read numbers going across, which is one of their assessments, she would literally jump one row to the third row, back up to the second row, stay on the second row, back up to the first row. So she scored less than the 1% in her age category. And that's why she couldn't read. Her muscles of her eyes were constantly dropping, so nothing made sense to her. And so very expensive later, she participated in vision therapy once a week for an hour. And then she graduated, and they reassessed her, and she literally went from a D to a B. So I retained her in second grade. She switched schools, and she went from a D to a B in that. And so I was so curious, because I have uncles to this day that cannot read. I have an uncle in his 20s who went back to try to learn how to read and still couldn't. And I'm like, Uncle, I think it might be an eye issue. And it was an eye issue. So I'm thinking of that with my daughter, and now I'm watching kids and they can't even get their eyes to the board. They also have a trouble adapting that depth. So if they're focused on something farther away and I'm putting a board in front of them, they're looking through it still 4 feet away. They can't bring it up. So all of that is going to affect. You know, your vision guides you where to go. Your vision organizes your reading, and your organizes your thought.
Right.
So going back to Robbie, that's why these are huge. They're huge markers. They have kind of a pencil feel. That's why she used a pencil. Schooling. Going in and out is get that proprioceptive feedback. So we are tapping in least motoric need to the cognitive to bring up that accuracy. We're helping them. We're putting down the board only with that letter on. So now they have a choice of 9 letters instead of 26. Once this becomes over 90% accurate, we faded all our, this is called the acquisition phase in Spelling to Communicate. We faded all of our prompts, which are we call directional prompts. They're correctional prompts. So they're like up, over. can't do that positional. It would be influencing, right?
Mhm.
Or we would say gesture like up, 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 down, 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 shift your eyes to the right, shift your eyes to the left. And so all of those have to be dropped. They have to be at a 90% accuracy with no corrective prompts. And then they advance to a
The
26
full.
letter.
Mhm.
So now you have 26 letters, you have infinite possibilities.
Right.
So same idea, now they're going, but it's much smaller. And so you have to think, if they know the answer is apple and they're poking the bee, this is a much smaller target, right? And so
Mhm.
you're just coaching that, you're trying to bring that big target smaller and smaller until your motor is accurate. So that after they hit open communication on this, so they have to be able to say at least 3 to 4 sentences, very clean, 90% accuracy on this. Then they advance to a laminate.
Mhm.
And then after the laminate, and it has numbers on the back, like that. And then after the laminate, so now they lose the proprioception feeling, right? So that's why there is a jump to this, because some of them need that feedback that they're not getting. Once again, it's a motor skill. It can be learned, and it depends on, at that point, they have access, right? And they have agency. They could say, you know what I could get out 5 paragraphs in this, but if I'm writing my blog and using this, I could only get out a half an hour, like 1 paragraph. And it's because I haven't increased my endurance and stamina. You can't run a 26-mile marathon. It's 1 mile at a time to build that endurance up. So then after that, they go to a keyboard. And it's so small, right? And there's also LED iPads, which if you've ever watched like Jordan Zimmerman or Elizabeth Bonkers.
Yeah.
She uses an iPad. So some don't like the LED screen, some like this, but once again, look at the difference of that. We're talking about in the motor realm, all 3 rows fit in that box.
Right.
So there is a very structure to the hierarchy, and we're always looking at that regulation piece, right? And so that's why we always say, try to find someone who is trained and certified in this area that has actually taken courses, because don't give your child a test to see if they could touch keys on your iPad that is this small and then determine because they don't know their name that they can't do this process.
Right.
This process is a motor skill. And
Right.
also there's a lot of trauma in that, right? These kids have to prove themselves like no other people ever have to prove themselves, right? Which is unheard of. Like, who says, well, you can't be mainstreamed, which is your legal right, because you can't do X, Y, and Z? Who does that? I mean, especially when it's a motor delay and they fully understand. So it becomes so patronizing to them. And would you, if would you want to work with someone and trust someone to do something when you know that they don't believe in you?
Right.
I would, right? And then that assumption that they're always listening, right? They're always understanding and always have been.
Right.
Now that's that onion that parents have to peel, because they've heard from professional that their child's delayed, cognitive delayed, going to have to be in a home. Good luck, where most parents deep down know, no, my child understands me. My child does everything. But what they do recognize is that it's never consistent, right? They'll be like, why can my child follow a 3-step direction one day, and then the next day I just ask him to get on his shoes and he runs upstairs and sits on his bed? And I'm like, well, that's apraxia. It's consistently inconsistent, because that sensory is hijacking that pathway.
Right.
And making it so hard for them. They know it. One of the most amazing tests that gives me goosebumps today is, and it was JB talking about it with his son Jamie, is that after they started doing initiation, our kids really struggle with initiation and stopping. So starting and stopping that plan and adjusting that plan on demand. So what they were working on is initiation. So they put 3 objects in front of them and they said, Jamie, what object do you want to pick up? They put the letterboard in front of him. And he said, I want to pick up the pencil. Okay. Then the S2C practitioner said, well, how long do you want us to give you? And he said, at least 2 minutes. And so they said, okay, your time starts now. And Jamie flapped his hands, picked his nose, got out of his chair, walked around. And after 2 very awkward minutes of silence, his dad said, Jamie, pick up the pencil and give it to me. And he walked right over, picked up the pencil and handed it to him. And the S2C practitioner was like, oh my goodness, Jamie, what was going on in that 2 minutes? And he said, I was trying to pick up the pencil.
Jeez.
So total brain and body disconnect. Now, what does that task remind you of? Every single ABA, everything. They put out 3 objects. Find the pig. They don't touch the pig. They don't even attempt the pig. Oh my goodness, they really don't understand the pig. Oh no, wait. They understand what pig is. They're purposely defining you. They don't
Right.
want
They just don't want to do it.
They don't want to pick up that pig and give it to you, or they don't understand that they need to pick up that pig and give it to you. And they break it down from a behavioral and a cognitive stance where it's a motor issue. So how patronizing.
Right.
For them to be like, I know what a pig is. I've known what a pig is since I was 2, but it's being taught to me over and over and over again until, unfortunately, the thing about ABA is it becomes myelinated and it becomes automatic. So kids could develop those loops all the time. There's kids that develop excessive motor loops around keyboards, right? You got the QWERTY board. They're typing in SpongeBob SquarePants, probably not a good one. Dory, over and over again, right? Yeah. So I think that's where that struggle comes in. And I honestly do believe that there's going to be so many spellers out there that eventually insurance companies are going to be picking it up, because I could bill insurance because I'm a licensed speech language pathologist specializing in AAC. They don't get to decide what AAC I use. Occupational therapists can bill insurance. Once again, they work on fine motor. They don't get to decide what fine motor they use.
Right.
And where ABA comes in is they work on everything, right? So I'm hoping there's going to be some breach eventually in time where, because it becomes like they almost will lose their jobs, but they really won't. They just got to change it to a presumption of competence and know that they're just breaking, like they're amazing at motor task analysis, right? Like all the steps you have to do, because that's what they do. They do a behavior analysis, which is steps to get something done. So they just have to coach it sequentially until it's mastered.
Who?
So,
Who are you talking about?
ABA.
ABA. Oh.
Or BCBAs.
Yeah.
But like that's, you know, and I'm the same way. I mean, I went to school for 8 years to become a speech language pathologist. I took 1 6-month course and was like, oh, wow, I've been doing this really wrong.
Yeah.
Not all aspects, 4 of them, because it's motor. It's just that one other one. And that listening doesn't have a look. I think that's another really big thing, is that society teaches us, schools teach us that listening has a look, right? You have to be looking at them, nodding your head at appropriate times. But let's be honest. I mean, gosh, through every one of my courses, I'm doodling in the corner. People have their own way to regulate themselves in order to listen, especially with kids with sensory motor differences, is they audio filter. They have so much input coming in. It's how they're regulating. So I have a client who literally scripts from the second I get in. And now he's not open enough to tell me, no, I want you to try to see if you can control my mouth and do something so I don't script. Or he's using it to help him focus. But as he's scripting, he's poking out those correct answers, no problem. They have nothing to do with it.
Right.
And that's that unreliable speech component. He has some moments of accuracy, but mostly.
Right. Right. So what would you say to any SLPs out there about S2C?
Is seeing is believing. feel free to reach out to me and we could have a conversation about it. I mean, life is about conversations, especially being communication specialists. You have to be willing to communicate and hear other people's side, whether you agree or not. I mean, there's lots of things I don't agree with. I have one of my really good friends is a BCBA. She still hasn't watched the Spellers movie. I've sent it to her like 5 times. I won't stop. I'm just saying, watch something. I mean,
Right.
We live in a free country. It's your due diligence to look at every avenue to see what works with your clients and all possible modalities. And don't just disregard something because you're scared. Don't do anything out of fear. Question.
All right, great. Renee, thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed learning from you and listening. And it was great to have you.
I love talking about this. Very
I'm so
passionate.
glad. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening and it helped you gain a new perspective. To learn more about our children's book series, Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures, or to learn more about what we do at Robbie's World Foundation, simply visit our website at robbiesworldbook.com.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.